The sky burned red above the ruined temple. Dark clouds moved slowly like heavy stones in the air. The ground shook with the beat of drums, deep and endless. The crowd gathered, whispering, chanting, waiting for blood. At the center of the broken courtyard stood the sacrificial pillar, a tall black stone, cold and cruel, rising above the people like a finger of doom. Chained to it was a woman, not human, her skin marked with glowing lines, her eyes full of pain. She was bound by iron cuffs, each one heavier than her body, each one carved with symbols of death. Her head hung low, yet even in chains, she looked proud. The crowd threw stones at her, mocking her, cursing her name. They called her condemned, cursed, born to be food for their gods. Still she did not cry. She did not beg. She only glared at the priests. The priests wore long robes that shimmered with oil and fire, their faces hidden behind bone masks, their voices sharp like blades. They raised their hands to the sky and promised the gods her blood. The people shouted in answer, their voices wild, their hearts full of fear. Everyone believed the sacrifice would keep the fires burning, the rains falling, the crops alive, but everyone also feared the prisoner. They feared her power, the way her veins glowed when she breathed. So they wanted her chained, silenced, ended. The wind carried the smoke of torches into the air. Ash fell on her shoulders, mixing with the blood from the cuts of thrown stones. Her chest rose and fell, slow, steady, defiant. The priests lifted a blade long and curved, shining with poison light. The crowd grew silent, waiting for the scream, waiting for the moment of death. Then, a sound broke the silence. It was not the drums, not the priests, not the prisoner. It was footsteps, steady, heavy, moving against the rhythm of fear. From the edge of the courtyard, from the shadows, a figure stepped forward. The people turned their heads, some gasped, some laughed. It was a human. He wore no armor, no mask, no mark of rank. His clothes were torn from travel. Dust covered his boots. Yet his eyes were alive with fire. He walked as if the crowd was not there. He walked as if the priests were nothing. He walked as if he was not afraid of gods. The crowd shouted at him, cursed him, told him to kneel. The priests raised their hands, demanding his head, but the human did not stop. Step by step, closer and closer to the chained woman, closer to the pillar that had never been touched by anyone but priests. The prisoner lifted her head. Her eyes met his, glowing with despair and sudden hope. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The human looked at her and gave the smallest nod, as if to say, "You are not alone." The guards moved, their spears lowered. They warned him, they threatened him, they promised pain, but the human ignored them. He reached the pillar. He placed his hand upon the black stone. The crowd gasped. The priests shouted in rage. The guards rushed forward, and the chains trembled. For a moment the earth itself seemed to breathe. The iron cuffs shook as if struck by unseen lightning. The prisoner's eyes widened, her glowing veins brighter than fire. The people screamed, some in fear, some in awe. No one had ever touched the sacrificial pillar and lived. No one had ever made the chains move. But this human did. The priests tried to shout over the chaos. They told the people it was a trick, a lie, a sin. But the human turned his face to them, and in a calm, clear voice he said, "Fate is not written in stone." The words fell heavy as thunder. The people froze, the priests trembled, the guards hesitated, and the prisoner felt the first spark of hope in years. The drums stopped. The sky seemed to wait. The crowd held its breath. The human stood tall. Before gods and priests and death, he stood tall beside a woman condemned, and for the first time someone defied fate. The silence broke into screams. The guards lunged forward. The priests raised their blade. The prisoner pulled at her chains with all her strength, and the human's eyes burned brighter than the torches. The night was no longer theirs. The gods were no longer safe. The story had just begun. The drums never started again. The torches flickered in the heavy wind. The crowd was broken between fear and anger. Some shouted that the human was cursed. Some whispered that he was chosen. but no one dared step closer to him. He stood calm, his hand still on the black stone, the prisoner's chains still shaking with a strange hidden power. The priests regrouped, their bone masks rattling as they barked orders. They believed themselves masters of this world, voices of the gods, rulers of life and death. Yet in that moment, even their words felt weak. The human had spoken against fate, and the world itself had listened. Beyond the temple, the city spread, like a scar on the land, tall towers of black rock, smoke rising from endless furnaces. The people here were taught one thing since birth: obey the gods or be destroyed. Fear was the law, fear was the chain. They believed their lives were fragile threads held only by sacrifice, and so they hated anyone who stood outside this cycle, anyone who looked unbroken, untamed, unafraid. The prisoner had been one of them once. She had walked these streets, carried water, spoke their tongue, but her glowing veins had marked her as different. They whispered she was touched by old fire, cursed by shadows. The priests called her dangerous, unclean, doomed, and so she had been chained to the pillar, left to rot until the day of her sacrifice. The people had watched, not with pity but with relief, for as long as she was the cursed one, they were safe. But now the humans stood beside her, and humans were not even part of their world. They came from stars beyond the burning clouds. They came in ships of steel and fire. They were small in number, often ignored, sometimes enslaved. Most believed humans weak, fragile, laughable. But this one was different. He had walked into the heart of the temple without fear. He had touched the stone and lived. He had spoken words that cracked the silence. The guards closed in, their spears flashing in the torchlight. The human finally moved, pulling his hand away from the pillar. The prisoner looked at him, still bound, still bleeding, and in her eyes was a question she could not speak. Why? Why would a stranger risk his life for her? Why would he stand against gods and priests? The human gave her no answer, only a glance sharp as a blade. Then he turned to face the guards. The crowd leaned forward, waiting for blood. They wanted to see this bold one broken. They wanted to see his body torn, to prove the gods still ruled. But the air was heavy, charged with something unknown. The guards attacked, fast, merciless, and the human fought. He did not fight like the people of this world. They used brute strength, heavy strikes, loud shouts. He moved silent, precise, each strike fast as lightning. He dodged, twisted, struck where the armor was weak. He turned their power against. Then one by one they fell, groaning, bleeding, defeated. The crowd gasped. Some cheered, some cursed. The priests trembled behind their masks. The prisoner felt her heart race. She saw the human move like a storm given flesh. And she wondered, not if he could save her, but what he truly was. No man of her people had ever fought this way. No man of her people had ever defied gods. Was this the strength of humans, or was this one touched by something older? When the last guard dropped to his knees, the human stood tall once more. The crowd began to break, some fleeing, some shouting, prayers to the sky. The priests raised their blades and cursed his name, but the human's voice cut through their cries. He said, "Your gods are not chains." He said, "Your fear is their weapon." And the people, for the first time in generations, heard words that sounded like truth. The prisoner's chains rattled again, louder now. The human stepped closer, his hand hovering near the lock. The priests screamed for the crowd to stop him, but no one moved. Fear chained them. Yes, but so did doubt. They doubted the gods for the first time. They doubted the priests, and that doubt was stronger than any iron. The human looked at the prisoner. She whispered her first words to him, her voice cracked, soft but strong. "Who are you?" The human answered with fire in his eyes. "I am what your gods fear most." The night grew colder. The torches dimmed. The priests pulled back, muttering dark words to the sky. Above them, thunder rolled, though no storm had been seen. The prisoner felt the weight of something greater. Not just her life, not just his, but the fate of the city, the fate of the people. Something had shifted. Something had broken, and it would never return to silence. The drums never started again. The temple would never sound the same, and the world itself had begun to change. The air trembled as the human stood before the prisoner. The broken guards groaned on the temple floor, their weapons scattered like dry leaves. The priests pulled back toward the steps, their bone masks glowing in the torchlight, and the crowd no longer shouted, no longer cheered, only stared with wide eyes. The prisoner's chains rattled again, heavy iron biting into her wrists and ankles. They were carved with old runes, glowing faintly like embers in the dark. These were not normal chains, they were forged in sacred fire, touched by rituals, bound by oaths. No mortal hand had ever broken them. To touch them was to touch death, to fight the gods themselves. The human stepped closer, his boots scraping. Against the stone floor, the prisoner felt her chest tighten, half with hope, half with fear. If he tried and failed, the priest would rise again. The crowd would regain its courage. She would be the sacrifice, and he would be nothing but another corpse. But the human's eyes did not show doubt. He reached for the iron cuffs, his hand hovering just above the glowing runes. The heat scorched his skin. The air hissed as if warning him away, but his fingers closed anyway. The crowd gasped as smoke rose from his flesh. The runes flared, burning brighter. The chains shook with a roar like thunder. The human's jaw tightened, his face hard with pain. But he did not release. Instead, he pulled, slow and steady, as if dragging mountains. The prisoner whispered through clenched teeth, "You cannot break them." Her voice trembled between warning and prayer. But the human answered in a low, steady voice, "Then watch me." The iron groaned. The runes cracked like ice in spring. The priests screamed, calling on their gods. They raised their blades, their voices sharp with ancient chants. The sky above twisted, black clouds spinning like a whirlpool. The crowd fell to their knees, terrified, begging the gods to strike him down, but the chains did not strike. The chains screamed. The prisoner felt her blood rush, her glowing veins blazing like rivers of fire. The iron cuff split with sparks, shards of sacred metal flying into the air. One cuff shattered, then another. She fell forward, breathless, her arms free for the first time in years. Her knees hit the stone, her hands trembling. The crowd cried. Out in horror, the priests dropped their blades, unable to believe what they saw. And the human stood above her, his hand bleeding, his eyes still burning. One by one, he tore the rest of the chains away, until nothing bound her but the memory of fear. The prisoner lifted her head, her voice stronger now. "You should not be alive." The human smiled, not in joy but in defiance. "That is what makes us human," he said, and the words struck her deeper than any blade. The priests gathered their strength, their chants rising higher. They called, upon fire, upon shadow, upon the gods who demanded sacrifice. The temple walls shook, cracks crawling across the ancient stone. The torches flickered, shadows stretching long and thin. The crowd pressed back, fearing both the priests and the human, caught between faith and terror, between chains and freedom. The prisoner looked at the human and saw something she had never seen before. He was no priest, no warrior of her people, no voice of gods, yet he carried a power greater than all of them. Not magic, not sacred fire, but will. A fire that refused to bow. And it was this fire that had broken her chains. The priests, furious and afraid, shouted one last curse. They promised the wrath of the gods. They promised endless death, endless pain. But their voices shook, their words weak against what they had just witnessed. The human turned his back on them, daring them to strike, and none of them did. The prisoner rose slowly to her feet, her body weak, her arms scarred, but her spirit alive again. The people stared at her glowing veins, brighter now that she was free. Some whispered that she was holy, some whispered that she was doom, but none could deny she was no longer condemned. Her chains lay broken on the ground, and their gods had done nothing. The human looked at her once more, his voice low. "Now you walk free, but freedom is heavy." She nodded, her eyes hard. "Then let us carry it together," she said. And for the first time, she did not feel cursed. She felt dangerous. The drums, long silent, began to beat again, but it was not the priest who beat them. It was the people, their rhythm wild, uncertain, new, the sound of fear breaking, the sound of change beginning. The temple shook with the echoes of a world shifting, and the chains that once ruled them were nothing but broken metal on the ground. The chains lay broken on the temple floor. The prisoner stood tall beside the human, her arms free, her veins glowing like rivers of fire. The crowd murmured in terror, their chants dying in their throats. The priests stumbled back, their bone masks trembling as if afraid to face the truth. For centuries, no one had ever stood against the gods. For centuries, sacrifice had been law, chains had been fate. But this night, one human had shattered both, and the people no longer knew what was real. The head priest raised his staff. Carved with skulls and fire symbols, his voice shook as he cried, "Blasphemy, defiance, sin." He pointed at the human, demanding his blood. The guards, still wounded and broken, forced themselves up. They staggered forward with spears shaking, eyes full of fear, but the human did not flinch. He turned slowly, facing the temple steps where the priest stood. His voice was calm, steady, carried by something deeper than strength. "You call it sin to fight chains. You call it sin to live free. You call it sin to defy your false gods," the words echoed across the courtyard. The crowd gasped, many covering their mouths. Never had anyone spoken so boldly. Never had anyone called the gods false. The head priest slammed his staff into the stone. Flames rose around him, tall and furious. Shadows stretched across the temple walls, twisting into monstrous shapes. The people fell to their knees, wailing, begging for mercy. But the human stood, firm. The prisoner beside him stood firm. The guards charged again, their spears flashing. The human moved fast, faster than before. He caught one spear, snapping it in half. He twisted another out of a guard's hands, striking him with the blunt end. Every move was sharp, clean, silent. The prisoner, still weak but burning with new fire, fought too. She swung her broken chain like a weapon, striking with fury. Together, they moved like storm and flame. Together they pushed back those who sought to bind them. The crowd roared in confusion. Some cheered for the priests, some cheered for the human. The world they knew was cracking. And in that crack, something new was being born. The priests raised their voices higher, calling to the heavens. Their chants turned the air heavy, the ground trembling beneath their feet. From the sky came bolts of light, searing and violent. They struck the courtyard, splitting stone, burning, torches to ash. The people screamed, scattering in fear. But still the human stood. The prisoner grabbed his arm, shouting, "They will kill us both." But his eyes were steady, his voice fierce. "No, they will try." The priests unleashed their power. Dark fire spilled across the temple, devouring walls, consuming statues. The human moved through it like a shadow, untouched. The prisoner followed, her veins glowing brighter, her strength returning. They reached the temple steps where the priests huddled in rage. The human raised his voice once more. "You think your power is fear, but fear breaks." He pointed to the people, trembling, uncertain. "Tonight, they have seen gods do nothing, and chains fall to dust." His words struck the priests harder than any blade. The head priest screamed, tearing off his mask. His face was pale, cracked with scars of old rituals. His eyes burned with madness as he raised his staff high. He cried, "The gods demand blood!" And he lunged forward with the fury of a man who feared his own end. The human met him with bare hands. He caught the staff, forcing it aside. The prisoner struck with her chain, knocking the priest to the ground. The other priests faltered, their voices breaking. Their chants scattered into silence. The crowd gasped. They had never seen priests bleed. They had never seen them fall. The human stood above the fallen head priest. He did not strike. He did not kill. Instead, he spoke with fire in his words. "No God commands me, no fate binds me, no chain holds me." And the crowd trembled. For some, the words were terror. For others, the words were freedom. The head priest crawled backward, eyes wide with fear. He screamed to the heavens, "Strike him down, strike him now." But no strike came. Only thunder in the distance, rolling like laughter. The prisoner stepped closer to the human, her voice steady. "They are afraid of you." The human shook his head. "They are afraid of you too because you are free." The crowd began to whisper, louder and louder. Some bowed to the priests, clinging to old faith, but more looked. At the human and the prisoner with wonder, more saw not death but hope. The balance had shifted, the fear was breaking. The human lifted his hand to the sky. "Your gods will not save you," he said, "but you can save yourselves." The people fell silent, his words like fire on dry wood, and the priests, once masters of this world, stood trembling, powerless, broken. The prisoner stood beside him, taller now, stronger, her glowing veins a beacon in the dark, her chains gone, her spirit alive. And together they had defied fate. Together they had defied gods, and the night itself seemed to bow before their defiance. The temple burned with fire not lit by human hands. Flames curled along the walls, shadows danced like living things. The crowd scattered, screams echoing into the night. The priests huddled, broken, powerless, their chants empty. The human stood, tall, blood on his hand, ash in his hair. Beside him, the prisoner breathed heavy but strong. Her veins glowed brighter than the torches, her eyes sharp with new life. But the danger was not over. It was only beginning. The head priest crawled across the stone, spitting curses. His voice cracked, but his words still carried fear. He called to unseen powers, begging them for wrath. The ground shuddered, the air split with a roaring sound. The people fled in panic, trampling each other, crying to gods that would not answer. The prisoner gripped the human's arm. "We cannot stay," she whispered, her voice urgent. He nodded once, his jaw set like stone. Together they turned toward the temple gates, but the guards, broken though they were, staggered up once more, spears lowered, rage in their eyes. They would not let them leave alive. The human stepped forward, meeting them head on. He moved like wind through the broken bodies, striking fast, twisting weapons away, pushing them aside. The prisoner swung her broken chain, striking with fierce strength. Every clash echoed against the burning walls. Every strike pushed them closer to the gates, yet more guards poured in from the outer halls. Their armor clattered, their voices rose in war cries. The escape became a storm. The prisoner's breath came sharp, her body weak but alive. The human fought on, never slowing, never breaking. His will was afire, his defiance unshaken. The temple gates loomed ahead, massive doors of iron carved with faces of gods. They were closed tight, locked to trap the condemned. The prisoner's heart sank, but the human only smiled. He placed his bleeding hand against the cold iron. The doors groaned, shivered, cracked, and with a roar they burst open. The night air rushed in, cool and sharp. The sky above burned red, thunder rolling in the distance. Beyond the gates stretched the dark city, streets narrow and twisting, towers rising like teeth. The human pulled the prisoner forward. "Run," he said, his voice firm, and together they ran. The crowd outside screamed at the sight of them. Some shouted in terror, others fell to their knees. The story of broken chains spread like fire through dry grass. Whispers flew from mouth to mouth. The gods are silent. The priests are weak. A human has defied them. The guards chased close behind, their spears clashing against stone. The human pulled the prisoner through the maze of streets. They leapt over broken walls, pushed through alleys thick with smoke. The city was alive with chaos. Bells rang, torches lit, horns blew in the distance. The hunt was on. The prisoner stumbled, her legs weak from years in chains. The human caught her, lifted her arm over his shoulder. "Keep moving," he said, his voice steady. She nodded, her eyes burning with determination. Her chains were gone, she would not fall now. The streets, twisted like a serpent. Every corner brought danger. More guards, more hunters. But the people did not rise to help. Some watched in silence. Some whispered, and in their silence the human saw doubt. Doubt in the gods, doubt in the priests. And he knew this night was more than escape. It was the birth of rebellion. They reached the lower quarter. Smoke choked the air. Furnaces glowed with endless fire. Workers stared as they passed. Some dropped their tools. Some fell to their knees. The prisoner felt their eyes on her glowing veins. No longer cursed, no longer condemned. She was proof the gods were not absolute. Behind them, the sound of pursuit grew louder. The guards would not stop, the priests would not forgive. The human's steps never faltered. He led her down into old tunnels, broken paths beneath the city. The air was damp, walls carved with forgotten runes. Here the torches could not follow. Here shadows ruled. The prisoner's voice echoed in the dark. "Why do this? Why risk death for me?" The human answered without looking back. "Because no chain deserves to remain unbroken." The word struck her deeper than fire. She did not know if he was fool or savior, but she knew she would follow. The tunnels twisted, deeper and darker. The roar of pursuit faded above them, yet danger still lingered. Strange sounds moved in the shadows, whispers older than the city. The prisoner shivered. "These tunnels are cursed," she said. The human only smiled in the dark. "Then they will not expect us here." Step by step they moved deeper. The city above raged with fire and chaos. The priests shouted for blood. The guards hunted through every street. But in the tunnels, in the silence, two figures walked free. A human who defied fate, and a woman once condemned, now unchained. Together they carried the weight of rebellion, and the night carried them forward into a future no god had written. The tunnels stretched on like veins beneath the city, stone walls damp with age, marked by symbols older than memory. The air was heavy, thick with dust and silence. Each step echoed, each breath carried the weight of forgotten stories. The prisoner leaned against the human as they walked, her body weak, but her spirit burning brighter. With every heartbeat, her glowing veins lit the path ahead like faint fire. She whispered, "These passages are forbidden." The human's eyes glinted in the dim light. "Forbidden paths hide forbidden truths," he said. They passed carvings etched deep into the walls, not prayers to gods, not marks of priests, but shapes of stars, ships, fire falling from the sky. The prisoner frowned, her hand brushing the stone. "These are not of our people," she said. The human nodded. "No, they are older." The sound of distant pursuit faded, yet the silence here felt alive, watching, listening. The prisoner shivered though the air was still, her voice low, wary. "What do you know of this place?" The human paused, his hand pressing against one carving. "I know your gods fear it," he said, "and what gods fear they cannot control." They reached a chamber wide as the temple above. The ceiling cracked open to the night sky. Stars shone through like eyes of forgotten giants. At the center stood a broken pillar, smaller than the sacrificial stone, but carved with the same runes. The prisoner stepped closer, her veins pulsing with light. The pillar glowed in answer as if it knew her. She pulled back in fear. "What is this?" she asked, her voice trembling. The human's gaze did not leave the glowing stone. "This is the truth they hide," he said. "These chains, these pillars, they are not gifts of gods. They are tools of men, of priests, of liars." The prisoner shook her head. "But the power, the storms, the fire from the sky." The human's voice cut through her doubt. "Machines, old machines left by those who came before. Your priests found them, claimed them, named them holy. They chained your people with fear, not faith." Her heart pounded, her mind twisting with shock. All her life she had believed in curses, in destiny, in sacrifice. Now she saw cracks in the story, cracks wide enough to swallow the world. She pressed her hand to the pillar again. It glowed brighter, her veins blazing like rivers of flame, and in that glow she felt something, not a curse, not a blessing, but a connection. The pillar responded to her, as if it recognized her. The human watched her carefully. "You are not condemned," he said. "You are chosen not by gods, but by the truth buried beneath their lies." The prisoner's breath caught, her eyes wide with fear and wonder. "What am I?" she whispered. The human's voice was steady. "You are the key they fear." The chamber shook with a distant roar. The priests had not stopped their hunt. Above the city burned. Horns called. Drums beat again. But down here in the hidden dark, a greater war began. The prisoner's mind raced. If the gods were false, if the chains were lies, then the people were slaves to fear, and she was proof that fear could break. The human stepped closer, his hand resting on the broken pillar. His blood from torn flesh dripped onto the stone. The runes flickered, sparking to life. A low hum filled the chamber, ancient machines waking from long silence. The prisoner gasped, her voice sharp. "You awakened it." The human's eyes burned with fierce light. "No, we awakened it." The hum grew louder, shaking the walls. Dust fell from the ceiling. Rocks cracked underfoot. The pillar split open, revealing a core of burning crystal. Its light poured over them, filling the chamber with fire. Visions struck the prisoner's mind. She saw skies filled with ships, metal cities shining. She saw wars fought with fire and storms. She saw priests long ago stealing this power, twisting it into chains. Her knees buckled, her hands clutching her head. The human caught her before she fell. Her voice broke as she whispered, all of it was a lie." The human held her steady. "No, not a lie. A prison," he said, "and prisons can be broken." Her veins blazed brighter than ever before. The crystal answered her blood. The chamber roared with power that had slept for ages. The human steadied her, his face calm though the air cracked with fire. "This is why they feared you, why they chained you. Because you can open the door they tried to bury." The prisoner looked at him, fear and strength fighting in her eyes. "And if I open it, what happens?" The human's voice was like steel. "Then your people will learn the gods were never gods. And once they know that, they will never bow again." The chamber shook harder, the crystal pulsing like a beating heart. The walls cracked, stones crashing to the ground. Above, the city roared with chaos. The priests screamed into the night. But here, in the hidden dark, two figures stood against centuries of chains, a human who defied fate, and a woman who was no longer condemned but chosen. Together they carried the truth. Together they carried fire. The chamber shook as the crystal pulsed with light. Shadows fled from the walls. The air roared with ancient power. The prisoner stood with her veins glowing brighter than stars. The human held her steady, his face calm though the world shook around them. Above, the city screamed in fear. Fires spread across the streets. Bells rang in endless warning. The priests shouted from the temple, their voices breaking in panic. They could not silence what had been revealed. They could not hide what had been awakened. The prisoner gasped as visions filled her mind again. She saw the chains of her people, not only iron but chains of fear, of silence, of blind faith. She saw them kneeling before false gods. She saw them crying for mercy that never came. And then she saw them rising, their chains breaking. The vision burned into her soul like fire. The human's voice cut through the storm. "You see it now, don't you?" She nodded, trembling but strong. "They are not gods. They are thieves," she whispered. "They stole power. They stole belief. They turned it into chains." The human's eyes narrowed with fire. "And you will be the one to end it." The crystal cracked open, its light spilling like rivers into the chamber. The runes on the walls blazed, the air filled with thunder. Old machines long buried stirred awake. The hum of forgotten engines shook the ground. The prisoner stepped closer, her hand hovering. Above the burning core, her veins glowed in rhythm with its pulse, as if it was alive, as if it was waiting for her. The human spoke low, steady. "This is your choice. No priest, no god, no fate can choose it for you. If you take its fire, you will change everything." Her breath caught in her throat. "What if I destroy us all?" The human's voice was like iron. "Then we fall free, not chained." The prisoner pressed her hand against the crystal. The chamber roared like 1,000 storms. Light poured into her, rushing through her glowing veins. Her body trembled but did not break. Her scream filled the tunnels, not of pain but of release. Chains shattered in her mind. Chains shattered in the world above. In the streets, the people saw the sky blaze with light. The temple walls cracked. Statues of gods crumbled to dust. The priests fell to their knees, screaming prayers that went unanswered. The guards dropped their weapons, their courage shattered, and the people whispered, "The chains are broken." Hope spread faster than fire, hope that could not be silenced. The prisoner staggered, her body glowing like flame. The human caught her, steadying her once more. She looked into his eyes, her voice fierce though weak. "They will come for us." He smiled, not with joy, but with defiance. Let them try. They climbed from the tunnels into the night. The city burned, but not with fear, with change. Crowds gathered, some kneeling, some rising, eyes turned not to priests, not to broken idols, but to the two figures standing in firelight, the human, with bloodied hands, the woman once condemned, now unchained. The people whispered their names, voices growing louder. Some called her savior, some called her doom, but all knew she was free. The priests tried to rally, their cries desperate. They shouted that the gods would strike. They shouted that doom would fall, but no doom came. No fire, no wrath, only silence. And in that silence, their power died. The prisoner raised her broken chain high. Her voice rang through the city. "No more chains." The people cried out in answer, "No more chains." The sound shook the towers. The sound broke the night. The sound became a promise. The human stood beside her, his eyes on the horizon. Beyond the city, beyond the mountains, storms gathered. He knew this was not the end. The priests would not surrender. Other cities still knelt. Other temples still bled sacrifices. The war was only beginning, but the first chain was broken, and that was enough. The prisoner turned to him, her voice quiet. "What if I am not strong enough?" The human placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then I will carry the weight with you." Her eyes softened, her fire steadied. For the first time, she believed she was not cursed. For the first time, she believed she could lead. The city watched as dawn touched the sky. The fires of the temple faded, the stars dimmed. But the light within her veins did not fade. It burned brighter, a beacon for all who saw. The future was uncertain, dangerous, heavy. But it was no longer written by priests or chained by fear. It was theirs. The human and the prisoner walked together into the new day, step by step, side by side. One who defied fate, one who was freed from it, and behind them, a world that would never be the same again.